So I take a 2-week break, and while I'm gone, I hear that Ozzy Osbourne passed away. Days later, the news broke out that Hulk Hogan had also passed away, and to say it was a shock would be an understatement. Through Reliving the War, the Thunder in Paradise series, and the countless amounts of Hogan videos that are on this channel, I even put together a few Hulk videos before I took my break, which were to go live during downtime. It's pretty clear that Hogan was one of the main topics of discussion on this channel, and Hogan is a reason why many of you found this channel to begin with. It's the kind of effect Hulk had on pretty much anything wrestling related. The whole industry wouldn't be where it is if it wasn't for Hulk, and I've mentioned this before and I know the argument. People will say if it wasn't Hulk it would have been someone else, but as I've previously said, it wasn't someone else, it was Hulk Hogan. Hogan, the wrestler Hulk Hogan in the essence of Hulkamania, it was once in a lifetime. He and Vince McMahon shaped what wrestling would become to create a legitimate boom period for the business, and if that wasn't enough, Hogan did it again in 1996 when he became part of the NWO. Terry Bollea's legacy, however, doesn't quite sync up with Hulk Hogan's earth-shattering accomplishments in pro wrestling. The words everyone seems to be throwing around are complicated or complex when describing what Hulk Hogan left behind, but I don't see it as complicated or complex at all. He helped create and evolve what pro wrestling is, but a lot of people, including fans and people within the business, also felt hurt by his actions outside of the ring. Some folks can separate the TV character from the real person, others cannot, and so the legend of Hulk Hogan doesn't gleam as much as it should. I'll talk about this a bit more later on, but all in all, the death of Hulk Hogan completely knocked me on my ass. And today I'm going to talk without any real plan or script about what Hogan meant to pro wrestling and how he changed everything. Hogan got his break when he was spotted in a gym by Jack and Gerald Briscoe. The brothers asked Hiro Matsuda to train Hogan, and legend has it that Hulk continued his training even after rehabbing a broken leg, an intentional injury caused by Matsuda himself. Hogan then began working in Florida for the CWF promotion. He then took himself to other territories such as Alabama and Memphis, and in 1979 Vince McMahon Sr. gave Terry the name Hulk Hogan while wrestling in New York. Things were going well for Hogan, but things would get much better when a big opportunity came knocking. Hogan got offered a role in Rocky III as Thunderlips, a wrestler who, in the movie, was going to fight Rocky in a wrestler versus boxer charity match. Vince McMahon Sr. didn't want Hulk to appear in the movie, so the New York booking stopped for Hulk when he decided to go ahead and star in Rocky III. During the recording of the movie and before Rocky III got released, Hogan went to work for Verne Gagne's AWA promotion based in Minneapolis. He began working for the AWA as a heel, but he would become the company's biggest babyface within a year. And then, in 1982, Hogan began a string of matches against heel champion Nick Bockwinkel that sent his popularity into orbit. This coincided with Rocky III being released in the same year, and then, again in the same year, Vince McMahon Jr. purchased his father's company with dreams of taking the New York territory national. McMahon wanted a centerpiece for this expansion, and Vince Jr. was eyeing up Hulk Hogan. Verne Gagne had refused to make Hogan the AWA champion. The AWA itself was a heel-led promotion, and since 1968 up until this point, the championship had only been held by two people, Verne Gagne himself and Bockwinkel. Hogan did beat Bockwinkel in April 1982 and he left St. Paul holding the championship, but the decision got overturned by AWA president Stanley Blackburn because Hogan used a foreign object in the match. Not only was Hulk frustrated about not getting the big push as AWA champion, but there was also an issue with merchandise. Hulk Hogan was one of the first guys to embrace merchandising, and Verne saw how many shirts Hogan was moving. The two couldn't come to an agreement on how this should be split. Hulk got word that Verne was pocketing money while Hulk was off touring in Japan. So the decision for Hulk to leave the AWA and return to New York wasn't a difficult one. Just on that note, and before we move on to the WWF, I'd be amiss for not mentioning Hulk's work in Japan. In 1980, Hulk Hogan began touring the land of the rising sun with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and he had continued touring for the next few years on occasion. Many point out how Hogan worked a totally different style in Japan, using the axe bomber as a finisher instead of the big leg drop, and generally putting in much more effort while working against the biggest names Japan had to offer. To prove how big Hogan was in Japan, he was the first person to win the original incarnation of the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, defeating Antonio Inoki in the finals of a 10-man tournament. So Hulk was done with the AWA and he's now in Vince McMahon Jr.'s WWF. The last time Hulk was in the WWF, he was a heel managed by Classy Freddie Blassie, but McMahon wanted to make it clear that Hogan had changed his ways and he was now a good guy. In January of 1984, inside Madison Square Garden, Hulk Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik to become the new WWF champion, taking over Bob Backlund's spot as the company's #1 babyface in the process. And from here, the Rockets were tied to Hogan's back and the WWF changed forever. Along with a partnership between the WWF and MTV, and along with a new backdrop that was coined the Rock and Wrestling Connection that saw musicians and celebrities get involved with the superstars from New York, the WWF rose greatly in popularity, while behind the scenes, Vince McMahon was buying up all the top talent from territories across North America. The WWF was becoming a pro wrestling juggernaut as other promotions struggled to compete, and at the very top of all this, from a TV perspective, was Hulk Hogan. The WWF positioned Hogan as the very best the world had to offer. Hulkamania may have begun in the AWA, but it was sent into orbit while Hulk was in the WWF, and when Hogan headlined WrestleMania 1, a show that featured all the top talent that McMahon was able to snatch away from other territories, and a show that also relied on the celebrity connections the WWF was able to make through avenues such as MTV, pro wrestling changed forever. The WWF became much more accessible to fans in the USA, and as time went on and more television rights were gained, the WWF began airing in markets outside of America. Many younger fans only knew of the WWF and nothing more thanks to McMahon's aggressive yet very smart distribution methods, so Hulk Hogan was viewed by many as the cream of the crop by default. This guy was in the main events, the crowds absolutely adored him, he talked with a lot of confidence, and he had an uncanny ability to attract fans of all ages through his mannerisms and the character he presented on TV. Some will say Hulk Hogan was simply a man in the right time at the right place, but I firmly believe that wrestling wouldn't be where it is today without Hulk. Of course it would still exist and McMahon would have eventually went international, but how successful it would have been, we simply don't know. The fact of the matter is, Hulk Hogan was the right choice. Hogan's insane popularity made McMahon's job a whole lot easier. The years went on and Hulk Hogan remained at the very top of the WWF totem pole. WrestleMania after WrestleMania, fans flocked to arenas and stadiums to see Hulkamania running wild, body slamming Andre the Giant, finishing the Megapower storyline with a win over Randy Savage, defending the whole country of America against Sergeant Slaughter. More or less, every WrestleMania was centered around Hulk Hogan's main event match. Was it all sunshine and rainbows though? No, it wasn't, because smart fans or diehard fans were already beginning to notice that Hogan didn't lose a whole lot of matches, and when he did, there was always some sort of caveat or some sort of asterisk beside his losses. It could be as simple as Hogan kicking out of 3 or something more nefarious such as outside interference, but Hogan losing clean was very rare, and this is something diehard fans grew tired of. It wasn't that people had this strong dislike for Hogan, it was more to do with Hogan's matches becoming predictable. Still, it didn't matter much to Vince McMahon. Hulkamania continued to run wild and Hogan found himself getting more opportunities outside of the ring. Some of these opportunities were thanks to Vince McMahon, others were from people directly approaching Hogan. Either way, Hulk became one of the most recognizable people in the entire world during that time, and he really did become the personification of American pro wrestling. One could go a step further and call him a bona fide pop culture icon of the era. All good things must come to an end though, and a mixture of different things led to Hulk Hogan distancing himself from the WWF. The steroid scandal, Hogan wanting to try more acting roles, and Vince McMahon pushing the new generation have all been cited as reasons for Hogan eventually leaving the WWF when Hulkamania was still going strong. I'm giving a very basic outline here by the way, and you can find loads of Hogan videos on my channel that dig deeper into Hulk's wrestling career, but for now I'm just trying to give you guys an overview. I just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, after the WWF came Thunder in Paradise, brother, and we all know how awesome that was. And then Hulk joined World Championship Wrestling while gaining himself one of the most eye-watering, unbelievable pro wrestling contracts you'll ever see in your life. To put it very simply, Hogan was paid ridiculous money to begin working in Atlanta. The red and yellow was going to run wild once again in WCW, but on top of this, Hogan had a creative control clause added to his contract, which was, and still is, a completely insane idea, which was always going to lead to issues, but more on this later. At this point in his career, fans were growing a little tired of Hogan's routine. I do feel that the internet downplays how initially successful Hogan was in WCW, and all you need to do is look at Bash at the Beach 94 and Halloween Havoc 94 to see how popular Hogan still was. But certain markets within WCW's reach didn't take too kindly to this New York guy coming in and acting like he was the company's saviour. Hulk would, on occasion, get booed when WCW visited places like the Carolinas, and on top of this, WCW fans were also noticing what WWF fans noticed in the early 90s. Hulk Hogan didn't lose a terrible amount of matches. On top of this, Hulk Hogan hadn't evolved as a character. It was difficult for once young Hulkamaniacs to continue supporting Hulk when he was doing the same thing he was doing when these same fans were 6 or 7 years old. So really, things had to change. WCW toyed with Hogan turning to the dark side, but it came across as really corny and unintentionally hilarious. But when Kevin Nash and Scott Hall returned to WCW, an opportunity came for Hulk to not only alter his character to an extreme level, but he could also use these two outsiders to help him get where he needed to be. Hall and Nash weren't your run-of-the-mill wrestling bad guys. They were more in tune with what was cool and what younger fans would potentially like to see when watching a wrestling show. So Hulk Hogan forming the NWO along with Hall and Nash was way more effective than Hulk, say, attacking Sting one night and announcing he's now a bad man. The NWO faction really did give Hogan a new purpose. He was spearheading a kayfabe takeover of WCW, and the way in which this was done was by destroying the company and swallowing it whole through strength and numbers. Gotta say though, through all the years that Hogan was active in pro wrestling, Hollywood Hulk Hogan in the NWO will always be my favourite version of Terry Bollea's wrestling character. Sure, he could mess up every now and then and unintentionally go back to sounding a bit corny. Sure, he sometimes tried too hard and a lot of his promos had zero direction. But when Jimi Hendrix started playing in the arena and Hogan walked down the ramp wearing black and white, you always paid attention. As a wrestling character, he had no redeemable qualities. He lied in his promos to get a reaction. He talked about how he was bigger than wrestling itself and how the business owed him everything, and it just worked. It worked so well that the NWO became the biggest thing in pro wrestling, and WCW destroyed the WWF in the Monday Night War television ratings, and for once it was Vince McMahon who had his back against the ropes. Ironic, seeing as it was Hogan who helped bring Vince to the promised land back in the mid-80s, and here he is in the mid-90s almost putting the WWF out of business for good. Again, it's not all sunshine and rainbows though. If you watched WCW during this time period, you'd know how absurd Hogan's bookings were, particularly when it came to match finishes. Very rarely did Hogan ever lose in WCW, and usually when he did, it had that little footnote underneath it. The prime example being the well-documented Starrcade 97 match against Sting. "That doesn't work for me, brother," became a saying often repeated when fans talk about match finishes that involved Hulk Hogan, and you can repeat this line quite often while watching Hogan's work in WCW. Time moves on, WCW proves to be absolutely terrible at telling stories. Hogan flounders as the creative team gets rearranged, and the chaos of World Championship Wrestling leads to Hogan calling it quits. Again, this is all well documented on the channel, and I'm sure you all know the story by now. At this time, wrestling had seriously moved on from saying your prayers and eating your vitamins. The WWF's Attitude Era and the rise of more contemporary superstars made Hogan and a lot of his friends look well past their sell-by date even before Hogan left WCW, and it looked like wrestling was going to continue on without Hulkamania. In all honesty, I don't think it would have been missed all that much anyway. Fans had simply moved on and times were so different. The WWF ends up buying WCW, Hogan sits out his Time Warner contract, and Vince McMahon decides to bring Hulk back to the WWF along with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. The company rolls into the Toronto Skydome for WrestleMania 18, the same venue where Hogan wrestled the Ultimate Warrior back at Mania 6. The villainous Hollywood Hogan has a match against top company babyface The Rock, and the crowd goes absolutely bonkers for Hogan. Many see it as Hogan's best match, but no one could have been happier with how it turned out than Hogan himself. Hulk's career had been on a downward spiral in WCW during 1999 and 2000. Options outside of the WWF within the United States had proven to be a bit limited since McMahon purchased World Championship Wrestling, so seeing this overwhelming support at Mania 18 must have been a relief for Hulk. He still had it and fans still wanted to see it. What followed was more WWE Championship gold and another opportunity for Hulkamania to run wild. But this time, Hogan wasn't protected by any kind of creative control clause, and if Hogan wasn't keen on losing matches, he'd have to do it the old-fashioned way, by politicking. Hogan lasted around a year and a half during this run. He wasn't happy with the Mr. America gimmick that Vince had given him, and he thought the payoffs for his matches weren't good, and so he went away only to re-emerge in 2005. He would team up and wrestle against Shawn Michaels. Their SummerSlam match proved that politics were still at play when it came to Hulk Hogan, and he wrestled Randy Orton at the following SummerSlam, a match that many felt Randy should have won. After another falling out with Vince McMahon, the next thing of note for Hogan was a stint in TNA, and judging by feedback still to this day, Hogan's time with TNA Wrestling was not well received. Fans and even wrestlers within the company felt that Hogan and Eric Bischoff took away many of the things that made TNA what it was. Many feel that Hogan used the company to get work for his friends and family at the expense of good television. All in all, it was seen as a bad time for TNA, and instead of making the company competitive, it became a rehash of past ideas. Following TNA, Hogan would begin making sporadic appearances for the WWE, the most famous of which being his WrestleMania 30 opening promo alongside Steve Austin and The Rock. The following year, Hogan wore the black and white once again when the NWO came out to help Sting during the Icons match against Triple H, but a few months after this appearance, Hogan's world came crashing down. A few years prior, a sex tape featuring Hogan was leaked online by website Gawker, and in 2015, the National Enquirer and Radar Online published comments found on the tape from Hogan where he explicitly expressed disgust at his daughter Brooke dating a black man. Not only this, Hogan also admitted to being, quote, racist to a point. He used the N-word, and naturally this led to a huge scandal that made the WWE terminate Hogan's Legends contract. Not only was Hogan out of an easy job, his legacy was seriously tarnished by what he said on the tape, and even in death, his remarks are still what many people think of when they think of Hulk Hogan. Not the man who helped build pro wrestling, not the legendary performer, nor the pop culture icon. Hogan was erased from the WWE's website, he was taken off the Hall of Fame listings, his action figures were removed, video game appearances were scrapped, and things went from bad to worse when transcripts were leaked from Hogan's telephone conversations with his son Nick while Nick was in jail. Hogan again made remarks similar to those in the leaked tape, so it was pretty much over for Hogan as a television character, or so everyone thought. In an interview with ABC, Hulk asked for forgiveness, blaming the comments on his upbringing around Tampa while his neighbours said this really wasn't the case. He also previously apologised in People magazine, saying there was no excuse for what he said. But as you can see by looking into social media these days, or even by folks within the industry, one way or another, Hogan wasn't forgiven by everyone. Hogan filed a lawsuit seeking $100 million in damages against the website. In the end, and after receiving funding from venture capitalist Peter Thiel, Hogan was awarded a grand total of $135 million in damages. He settled for $31 million, seeing as he managed the bankrupt Gawker. This win in the courtroom didn't mean a win outside of it though. Hogan's personal life was in shambles, his reputation had been seriously tarnished, and many thought Hulk would disappear from the public, never to be seen again. Instead, the WWE would eventually bring him back for a few appearances, and these appearances gradually got worse and worse for Hogan. He was first used as the host for Crown Jewel 2018, which was a safe bet seeing as it was in a different country. He then returned to Raw to pay tribute to Mean Gene Okerlund, who had just passed away. Again, a safe bet seeing as it was in memory of Mean Gene. He inducted Brutus Beefcake into the Hall of Fame, and he even got put into the Hall of Fame again himself as part of the NWO, allowing Hogan to collect his second Hall of Fame ring. But as time went on, a large portion of fans grew more tired of Hogan showing up on TV. He hosted WrestleMania 37 alongside Titus O'Neil, and even though COVID restrictions stopped Raymond James Stadium from being at full capacity, there were boos for Hogan, particularly on night 2. And in Hogan's final WWE appearance, fresh from from showing support to current United States President Donald Trump, Hulk was booed out of the building. The first Raw on Netflix would also serve as Hulk's final night inside a WWE arena, and fans showed their displeasure by loudly booing Hulk every time he tried to speak. It's insane that someone who once held the world of pro wrestling in the palm of his hand was now being told, "We don't want you anymore." Hogan died of cardiac arrest in Clearwater, Florida on July 24th, 2025. He was 71 years old when he passed. Jimmy Hart had posted that Hogan was doing just fine before his passing, but later revealed that he was told to post this by Hogan's assistant. Immediately, wrestling fans on the internet shared their thoughts. Some praised Hogan for ultimately moulding the pro wrestling we know today, others threw stones at his open casket. Some fans had mixed emotions where they wanted to acknowledge Hulk's accomplishments, but they also wanted to make it clear that they don't condone the man who played the character. All in all, it seemed like a consensus wasn't reached, and that's why people started using words like complicated and complex. As mentioned at the top of this video, I don't think it's complicated or complex. You have a TV character who broke new ground and became a global sensation, but the guy playing the character destroyed his own legacy. It's really as simple as that. There's going to be people out there who can celebrate Hulk Hogan, there's going to be people who refuse to acknowledge him, and there's going to be people who can say they can separate Hulk Hogan from Terry Bollea while sending a mixed message. Anyone who's watched this channel in the past should have a good idea of what I thought of Hulk Hogan. His locker room antics and all the politicking, while frustrating, is something I can poke fun at. I didn't get into wrestling thanks to Hulk Hogan, and he was never my favourite performer, but I can fully understand what he meant to wrestling, and I can fully appreciate the sheer pandemonium he caused when entering arenas in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's not hard to get caught up in the whole Hulkamania thing when that music plays and Hogan walks out to a sea of screaming fans. But facts are facts. Hogan said what he said and he paid a hefty price. He did get that 31 million, yet that wasn't enough to buy back the overwhelming adoration he once benefited from, and in the end, a huge portion of fans and wrestlers didn't feel like Hulk ever truly apologised. So again, facts are facts. Hogan built a legitimate empire, his words would eventually make that empire crumble. And seeing as his apology wasn't universally accepted and his actions afterwards didn't align with people's beliefs, those mainly being political, this all meant Hogan wasn't able to rebuild that empire before passing. For many, no apology was good enough, and it was never going to be good enough. Even death itself was not enough to fix Hogan's wrongdoings, judging by comments made after his passing, and I fully expect the same comments in this video. But, you know, all I know is I'm not one to sit here and tell people how to feel either. I cover old school wrestling, and I earn a living trying my best to give you guys something to watch. If Hulk Hogan is the reason for wrestling being what it is today, then in that respect, Hulk Hogan's a massive reason why I even have this job, and I, like many others in this field, have earned money off Hogan's back without him even knowing it. Same goes for any wrestler I've talked about actually, and the same expands out to writers, journalists, and anyone who covers wrestling really. So, in a perfect world, we'd all be celebrating the life of pro wrestling's most influential personality. Instead, we're talking about complications and complexities of the man Terry Bollea. And seeing as those words have been said so much, I guess that's the ultimate consensus. That's the legacy that Hulk Hogan's left behind. What is messed up though is folks shaming others online for having nostalgia for Hogan, and on the flip side, folks trying to dictate and police how people should feel about Hogan. It's wrong to tell people what they should think. You do you and let others be. We're all adults and everyone has their own values or beliefs, and if those values and beliefs don't align with yours, then so be it. That's just life. Don't forget though that Hulk Hogan was human, he leaves behind loved ones, so condolences to the Bollea family. And for the Hulkamaniacs out there who lost their childhood hero, for those who ride with the red and yellow no matter what, condolences to you too. Hulk Hogan was wrestling, he created fans, he made people want to get into the sport. He was far from perfect, but again, facts being facts, he is the ultimate legend of the business. He was the spark that set the pro wrestling world on fire. R.I.P. brother.